Hello and welcome you beautiful people out there. This is a build video of a Titanic from Revell in 1/400 scale. This is an iconic ship. It's really big and it's my first time ever tackling something this huge. This is a anniversary edition of this iconic ship that was released by Revell. I don't know exactly when this particular model kit was released, but I do believe it was somewhere around 2021, 2020. But the model itself inside, it's pretty old. It's from the 90s. The mark on the mold says 1999. I don't like to be negative about a model kit, but this one is really rough around the edges, to say very politely. In fact, it's so rough around the edges that I would not recommend this model kit to anybody, period. But back then, when I was making this video and building the ship, I didn't know all these nasty little secrets that it holds. And it starts with the double side hull that you have to assemble from two pieces, which is really not ideal because of terrible alignment issues. But the hull of the ship is the least of your problems. It all starts after you start assembling the deck area and all the pieces go onto the deck. It is just, how should I say it nicely, a big pile of stinking poop. And that is a shame for two reasons. First, this is an iconic ship that does deserve TLC from the manufacturer and the builder. And the second, it's a big ship. It has details, and at this point in time when I was making the video, I was already thinking about extensions for the Titanic because I was looking online and I saw that you can actually buy wooden decks for the Titanic, which really got my fires going. I also did quite extensive research on how the hull was painted, what colors to use, and I even managed to mix the waterline paint myself using just paints from Tamiya that I already owned, and that was really good. And you'll see those ratios as we start painting the hull. In fact, to be honest, the hull of the ship was the least of my problems in this build, even though here you can see a nasty gap on the bottom. But that's just because I didn't really sand it down really well. But anyway, I fixed that, it was great. However, everything else after the hull was complete was absolutely terrifyingly bad. It was especially annoying because this was an anniversary edition release of this iconic boat, and I thought that Revell at least made a new mold, but they just reboxed the old boat, adding some postcards and menus that were on the Titanic. Honestly, if I had done a little bit more research on the boat and on the box and actually managed or bothered to open the box prior to buying it, I probably wouldn't. Really, honestly, I wouldn't. And the only reason that I actually managed to build this ship, even though it took me almost a year, not because it was difficult, but because it was so bad, is because my girlfriend really loves Titanic, and she said pretty please many times, and I just can't say no to that. So at this point you might be asking yourself, well, what's so horrifying about the model? Well, it is the actual pieces of the Titanic's upper hull. Not only did they not fit properly, they're not dimensioned correctly, and there's so much flash on each and every piece that if you want to do a proper job at this, you're probably going to spend hours in cleaning and sanding the parts. And here is the proof of its vintage heritage. What I'm trying to say is that all that cleaning and sanding and preparing the parts to be fitted on the ship really takes a lot of energy and enthusiasm out of what should be an exciting build. And when I was building the lower hull, I was still very excited. It was really interesting to see how it was looking, and I actually replaced the keel like you see here. I used some styrene squares to make it flush. I used lots of putty to smooth everything out and make it look pretty. And I actually achieved my goals, and I was really happy and excited about this particular part of the hull and the boat. And as you can see, I'm mixing my own paint. It's called, I believe, anti-fouling red, and it's made up of these four paints with the ratios that I'll show you right now. And I do believe that this waterline paint can be used not only for Titanic but other ships of its era and some warships at that time. The paint that you get is fantastic. It covers very well because it's of course Tamiya paint nonetheless, and as you'll see, it's just beautiful. Right now it looks more of a warship than a Titanic, but as you add other colors to it, it will become more Titanic-y. And the way that I attempted to paint this model was also pretty methodical. After all the sanding and puttying and filling and smoothing out, I used Tamiya's primer, gray fine primer. Then I applied the red waterline coat. After that, I sprayed the upper hull with the gray white. Note that I didn't want to use off-white color for the upper hull because in my opinion it looks a little bit too orangey, and so I went with this gray white, which gives it a more cool and mysterious look. After that, I painted the famous yellow stripe that goes around the ship that separates the upper hull and the bottom hull. And after all that was finished, I masked everything off very carefully and first painted in this gray black color, but it was a little bit washed out in my opinion, so I just covered it with Tamiya's X1 gloss black paint, which turned out to be pretty sweet, at least in my humble opinion. And so it was. This bottom portion quickly came together and it was nice. I was really happy, but all was not well with this model. And I will tell you as we build along why exactly. But just to give you a hint, misalignment features, poor fitting, and just general flash is going to be a constant companion for this model. So if you happen to have this model in your stash and you want to build it, I do believe that this is one of those model kits that you can postpone indefinitely and just buy yourself a better Titanic. Might I recommend REVELL's Titanic in 1/400 scale. That was actually a copy of Academy's Titanic in the same scale. That is ways better, but it does have its own quirks, and I'll tell you about those quirks later. But for now, let's stick to this particular model, shall we? Here I'm going to be painting the yellow shear line that separates this boat into two halves, at least in my opinion, the upper and the lower hull. As you saw in the previous clip, I painted a little bit more of the white to cover the gray primer, just to make sure that the yellow is going to be very vivid, and I sprayed the yellow very generously and made a very thick line so that I had enough material to work with as I'm going to be masking the yellow painted surface now with some masking tape with a millimeter thin masking film from AK Interactive. And here in this clip you can already see that I've already masked off yellow shear line with this very flimsy, flexible tape. Then I made sure that no paint is gonna spill over on top to ruin the shear line, so I covered the top of the blue tape with extra Tamiya masking tape just to make sure it's sealed fully. And after that I used Tamiya's X1 to cover the rest of the middle of the body. And as you saw previously, this was already painted with gray black, but it just didn't look right in my opinion, so I just used this glossy black. It might not be historically accurate, but it does give a nice contrast to the rest of the paints, and it looks, well, at least visually better. Here I'm painting the middle propeller with Tamiya's gold color. I actually painted all propellers previously with brass paint from AK Interactive, the ones that you get into tubes, but that didn't really turn out that well, so I just painted over it with red and then hand painted this gold color from Tamiya. It's not exactly brass, but it does give a distinction between propeller and the hull, and that's kind of the point. And besides, most of the time you're going to be viewing this model from a distance, so it's not going to matter that much. And you should really view my model from a distance, because if you go up close and personal, you might just want to vomit a little bit. For the bow and the stern, port and starboard side sidewalls, I used this light brown from AK Interactive and sprayed with an airbrush. And this is how it will look once the deck is fitted. I've already painted the deck and I'll show you how I did it, but for now this is how it's going to look. The last thing to attach was the middle propeller, and then I gave it a generous coat of clear gloss varnish from AK Interactive, the one that comes in the giant spray can. The last two pieces to be attached to the hull were the anchors, but first I need to spray them with gloss black. And this is part 1 of the build. Join me in part 2 when we will be continuing and maybe even finishing this boat. See you then. Bye bye.